And he is the one who promulgated this kind of imperial venture of going out into the Hawaiian Islands and taking them over and pushing into South America. And they started pushing to try to consider building this entire canal down in Panama. And they had this entire idea that this entire realm was under their control. And that was John W. Foster. And he was the father-in-law of Robert Lansing, who became the Secretary of State under Wilson. And he was, in fact, the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, who, in fact, were brought to the Versailles Treaty negotiations by Robert Lansing, their uncle, and they personally drafted the reparations portions of the Treaty of Versailles and put into the treaty the demand that Germany be held responsible for the war, World War I, and that they have to pay reparations for that aggressive war. And what I don't want to get too far afield in this, but the bottom line is that particular group of people that was organized as Brown Brothers Harriman, the private investment firm among all these robber barons that I've talked about, this group from 1868 to 1898, that group of 30 to 50 men that took over all of these different elements of the American economy, they sat as a combined group of people at this place, this Wall Street financial firm of Brown Brothers Harriman, and decided how they were going to divvy up all the resources, not only of the United States with their corporations, but internationally. And that they coordinated and co-opted the federal government. They, for example, ordered in United States military expeditionary forces into various places in South America over and over again, including Nicaragua, for example. In 1903, they sent in a foreign military expeditionary force under General Butler, the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, to establish control over Nicaragua. They overthrew the governments in Panama in order to build the Panama Canal. They were engaged in all of these types of activities during that entire period. And so that this group that sat together in Brown Brothers Harriman, they were all the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman that chaired those meetings where they sat together to coordinate their activities. The guy's name was George Herbert Walker. And George Herbert Walker is the grandfather of George Herbert Walker Bush, George H.W. Bush, and is the great-grandfather of George W. Bush, George Walker Bush. And that's the group that, sitting in Brown Brothers Harriman, that helped coordinate this entire operation through the leadership of their law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell was the law firm where both John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles were partners in that law firm. So that this is the period that I want to focus on as the period in which this elitist element that had indeed participated in their earlier the earlier iterations of them in setting up the American Constitution, having this kind of elitist dimension to it. But this group at Brown Brothers Harriman is so important to understand that this is the group that helped choreograph at the end of World War I, not only the imposition of the reparations requirements against Germany, but also undertook to be the group that loaned money to Germany to pay those reparations. And they also loaned the money to Germany to rebuild their military. And they made massive loans to Germany to rebuild Germany to become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe, because they were now locked in this ideological struggle with the Soviet Union that had declared that they were not going to participate in this Western capitalist nation-state grounded acts of imperialism. They were going to try to counter them. And so that began the entire period of the Cold War that went on from basically October of 1917 all the way to December of 1991, that whole basically 75-year period. But it was during that important period right at the end of World War I when this group of people were assembled functioning in this way, that it was at that same period that the Allies, now including the United States that helped win World War I, that they established this major commission. This becomes extremely important for us here in this final third of our course, that they established a 22-person commission in 1922, following the end in 1918 of World War I. They established a 22-person commission under the chairmanship of Winston Churchill, who was the Secretary for Colonial Affairs of the United Kingdom. And what they did is they turned toward the entire Middle East that had been under the hegemony of the Ottoman Empire up until the end of World War I. And what they did is because the Ottoman Empire, in the form of Turkey, had joined as an ally of Germany in Austria in World War I, the victors, the Allies, took all of that territory from the Ottoman Empire and established its hegemony over that territory. And through this commission, this 22-person commission, they superimposed the boundaries of nation states over that entire area of the Middle East. Just big square blocks of territory. And then they chose one of the tribes inside that box, that particular box that they chose. They chose one of the tribes and put them in as a king. And they undertook the same process that they had in Europe of the nation states, each having their kings, pursuant to the Treaty of Westphalia, in that they set up that same system for the Middle East, and they set up Jordan, they set up Kuwait, they set up Syria, they set up the boundaries of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and they picked a particular family to become the royal family of that area. And what they did is they went ahead and they signed exclusive lease agreements on behalf of the oil companies from the Western civilization, the 7 major oil corporations. They divvied up the contracts for the oil inside each of those nation states that were artificially created by the Churchill Commission. And they made the contract with that royal family, that single tribe that was made the royal family by the Commission and by the Allied powers. They made a contract with them that they were going to give an exclusive lease to the 7 Western oil corporations: Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of California, Royal Dutch Shell, Esso, I guess it was at that time. It was before being Exxon, and the British Petroleum. There were 7 of the corporations that had these exclusive lease agreements that were to last for 60 years. And in exchange for that, the Arab American oil corporations agreed that they would give royalties to the private family, to the actual royal family, the single tribe that was there, not to their country, not to help finance anything in their country, but just to that royal family. And so that those royal families became fabulously wealthy over the next 25 years by even having a small percentage, whether it's like 5 to 8% of the net profits that were made by the Western oil corporations. And this is the regime that was set up by the Western Allies, a completely artificial set of nation states in what had been historically for tens of thousands of years just tribal territory of individual tribes in certain alliances among tribes that were in there, but they superimposed a completely artificial European form of government on them with a royal family and kings, and they began to extract the oil from those territories, and paying those royal families billions of dollars in royalties for their small percentage of interest in the oil profits. and with the understanding and agreement that those royal families would use major portions of those funds to buy military equipment from the Western countries in order to sustain them in power against their own people. And so that they set up a whole series of these completely authoritarian, dictatorial governments in the Middle East, all propped up by the Western nations, getting money that was given to those royal families as royalties for the oil that they had an exclusive lease agreement on. And they would use portions of the money to buy weapons and armaments from the Western countries and be trained by them in order to suppress their people. So that was the regime that was set up at the end of World War I. And what's extremely important to point out here is that this same group of people that were at Brown Brothers Harriman, these, say, 30 to 50 men that sat in these meetings, that in addition to asserting complete control and dominion over the American government and pushing into all of Central and South America and asserting control over their resources and expanding out into the Pacific Ocean, heading toward China to get access to their resources, they also, in addition to doing that, they also set up a thing called the Union Bank of New York. This is in 1924. This commission, the Churchill Commission, was 1922. The end of World War I was 1918. And this Brown Brothers Harriman group were operating fully under the leadership of George Herbert Walker. And what they did in 1924 is George Herbert Walker retired as the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman, went off and set up a thing called the Union Bank of New York. And the 50 men that were the people that were members of the Brown Brothers Harriman, they helped capitalize that bank. They put in millions of dollars of their own profits that they had been making through their various common investments that they engaged in together. They put the capital into the Union Bank of New York, and George Herbert Walker left and became the president of the Union Bank of New York. And he had his son-in-law, Prescott Bush, become the new CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman. And he went over, then George Herbert Walker went over and headed up the Union Bank of New York, capitalized by the members of Brown Brothers Harriman. They set up a foreign subsidiary up in the Netherlands called the Bank of Commerce and Trade, or the Bank of Shipping and Trade, under this guy by the name of Fritz Stuysen. And this group financed the rise of the fascist party in Germany. They financed the reconstruction of the entire international headquarters of the Third Reich. Actually, the lawyer for Brown Brothers Harriman, Alan Dulles, and John Foster Dulles, actually sat in a meeting authorizing the appointment of Adolf Hitler to be the Chancellor of Germany in 1934. This is extraordinarily important for us to understand, to see what it is that's going on here. That this entire operation on the part of this not even 1% of the population of the United States, 1/1000th of 1% of the population of the United States, these robber barons, were in fact establishing a virtual complete hegemony over the resources of North America, South America, moving toward China, and they had in fact, through the Union Bank of New York, set up the financing in Europe to basically establish dominion over all of Europe through Germany. So this is the state of affairs that basically obtained between the end of the American Civil War and that ended up generating World War I. And then at the end of World War I, this same alliance of people established this type of dominion over not only North America and South America in the Pacific Islands, but also indirectly through their creating and financing of the rise of the German state in England, in Europe. They established hegemony over the continent of Europe. So that's the operation that was going, and they treated the tribal people, the indigenous tribal people of all of the Middle East as mere pawns in what they were doing. They considered these people to be not entitled to any type of say-so over what was being done in their lands. And that these nation states that they set up, these boxes, these artificial boxes of nation states that they set up, were set up completely ignoring the actual dynamics of the people that lived inside those particular artificial boundaries. So they had different tribes that didn't really even get along with each other, all put into one particular purported nation state. In that they had boundaries that divided tribes and put part of the tribe in one nation state and another part of them in the other nation state. And it was then in that particular process that they established they sowed the seeds of what later was to become the Arab Spring, and that later uprising of people against these authoritarian dictators and their sons, one after another, who stayed in control through the doctrine of primogeniture, of the eldest sons would take over each one of the kingships, and they would rule with the support of the Western powers that were actually financing their militaries. So this is the setting for what we want to be talking about here in the final third of the course, that we want to take a look at the indigenous peoples of the world that have been subjugated by these people, not only in the Middle East, but in Africa, Nigeria, and the places where these oil corporations are exploiting their oil and resources, in Central America, in Ecuador, and other places in South America. And we want to try to determine, taking a close look at what's going on up in North and South Dakota right now, on the part of the Lakota people. The first wave of effort that was generated in the face of the Dakota Access Pipeline to try to stop that pipeline, what the lessons are that were learned there, what is in the offing with regard to the Keystone XL pipeline, the role that the Lakota people are going to be playing in that. Also other pipelines like the Trans Mountain pipeline that is going to be planned to be built from the Bakken oil fields westward all the way across the Rocky Mountains and down through the state of Washington. There's a Trans-Canada pipeline that they're planning to build up there. That there is a huge process going on right now with the Trump administration being in there. Now, and as I say, we've talked before, it is not coincidental at all that the Secretary of State of the Trump administration was Rex Tillerson, the CEO for ExxonMobil. As I said, Trump is a reductionist. He's a simple-minded guy. He said, look, if we're going to have taking over and controlling the petroleum of the planet be our primary foreign policy goal, why shouldn't we have the CEO of ExxonMobil be our Secretary of State? And why shouldn't we have Scott Pruitt, who's a rabid opponent of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Attorney General of Oklahoma? Why shouldn't we have him be the head of the EPA and get rid of all of these limitations on the ability of the oil corporations to exploit oil in any particular environment they choose to? And why shouldn't we have the head of the Secretary of Energy be Rick Perry, who is the vice president of Sunoco, Sunoco Logistics, and the former governor of Texas, another huge oil state? Why shouldn't we just do this? And this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing Donald Trump, who is such a reductionist and a simple-minded person, of just going forward doing what was basically the plan that the Republican administrations had figured out, in the Bush administration, reaching out to Russia to get them to come on board to become an integral partner with the United States in protecting the control of petroleum on the planet, to keep it out of the hands of China. That what we see happening here basically is, and this is the thesis that I'm proposing, is that he is so simple-minded and so completely devoid of any type of moral restraints, is that he just sort of went right straight to it. And it's embarrassed everybody. It's embarrassed the Republican Party. They'll keep him there long enough to get their tax breaks. And again, he just turns around and says, hey, why don't we just cut in half, basically, the taxes on corporations, and turn them loose to run the world? Why don't we reduce dramatically the taxes on the richest 1% of the people in the country and let them, ply their trade as best they can? Let's eliminate the estate tax entirely so that they can pass on their wealth to their children and grandchildren. Isn't that what we're really all about anyhow? He's saying, and so he just goes ahead and does it. And what's happening now is that once the extremely wealthy get their reduction in their income tax, once they get the reduction of the corporation taxes, once they get the elimination of the estate tax, now what they're after, of course, is control of the judiciary. And that's why they're still leaving him in there, so that he can continue like a moron, just to simply appoint, nominate judges from the Federalist Society, and have McConnell, call them up immediately to get a vote of a simple majority of the Republicans. And, but in the meantime, he's humiliating them. He's humiliating the Republican Party in the eyes of everybody else. They're saying, wait a second, these people are just as bad as we suspected. These people are doing exactly what they've been accused of doing for all these years by the most radical elements in the culture. And so now the Democratic Party, the more moderate Democratic Party after the World War II, or the end of the Cold War, the new more moderate Democratic Party wants to try to make it seem like it's just him. It's just Trump. This isn't a fundamental problem. This isn't a fundamental moral problem at the very heart of the body politic of the American government right now. This is just a wild hair. It's just one bad apple, one particular individual. So let's try to just figure out what it is he did all by himself, like obstructing justice. That he actually attempted to fire the special counsel, which, as it turns out, he has every constitutional right to do. But they're caught now so off guard that they're making charges against him which aren't even really going to be sustainable, as a matter of illegal activities on his part. But they won't go to the bottom line of this thing and say that the reason that he's colluding with Putin and the reason that he's colluding with the oligarchs is because he thinks this is just business. He thinks that this is just the business, that they ought to be able to set up some kind of a common partnership, to bring in the Russian oil under the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and the Arctic Shelf. We ought to be able to bring them into partnership with ExxonMobil and the other oil corporations. So he's looking to say, what is it I'm doing wrong here? Why is it everybody's angry at me? I'm only doing the same thing that everybody's been doing since the beginning of this thing. And so he feels like he's being unjustly treated. And he's being totally indignant about it. And the Democrats are trying to figure out what to do about it. And meanwhile, now, the indigenous people are starting to mobilize. The indigenous people are mobilizing not only in the Native American territories of the Lakotas against the pipelines. The indigenous people in North America, the black people, the heirs to the slavery of our country are mobilizing now in voting and getting registered to vote and coming into the polling places and electing people that are more progressive. They're electing black people and brown people. They're electing more and more women, the people who've been consciously excluded from the origins of the Constitution, from the share of power. are rising up against these people because Trump has done us all the favor of making it completely obvious what they're doing. The stuff that they've been doing so subtly before, now it's right in everybody's face. And so now the indigenous people are rising up, they're organizing, and they're going to take power back. That in the regular Democratic Party is caught in between saying, wait a second, let's not get too carried away here. Let's not do that. And now Trump has come on and he's saying, oh, look, let's attack Iran. Let's attack Iran because they're selling oil to China. Wait a second, these guys don't get it. They don't understand what's happening here. They're not supposed to be selling any oil to China. We're trying to freeze out China. So and he says, let's not only that, but let's pound China with tariffs, which we end up paying. This guy is a complete moron, and thank God for him. Thank God for him, because he's now completely exposing what these people have been since the very beginning. So the question that we're going to be facing in the rest of the course for the rest of the next month and a half or so is, can the indigenous people effectively mobilize? Can the indigenous people effectively organize? Can they, in fact, seize power? Very importantly, can they govern? And what type of alliance can responsibly be established on the part of Caucasian people with people from these various indigenous cultures that this elite group of white male capitalists in their financiers have been exploiting for all these 250 years and longer? So that's the alliance that we're talking about now, and it's a different alliance than their new Northern Industrial Alliance. It's a people's alliance. It's an indigenous alliance. And there's going to be leadership rising up over this, and they're going to try to put up new candidates to replace these mealy-mouthed Democrats who have been in the House of Representatives and in the Senate in refusing to vote to protect the planet. And it seems to have taken a threat to the life of the planet itself before people will mobilize. But now the time has come. The people are all being threatened all across the board. And so therefore, there's a distinct possibility that a high enough percentage of the white Caucasian people are going to join forces with the indigenous people to try to save the world, to try to save the climatic system of our planet from these robber barons. Okay? So that's going to be the nature of the rest of the course. So you can start to think about what your fundamental thesis is going to be now that you've gotten the papers done on the impeachment. And we're going to come full circle round to try to end up relating all three of these phenomena: the global climate change, the rise of the indigenous people, and the potential impeachment of Donald Trump, to get rid of him before he does more damage, but not before he enlightens all the right voters about what these people are up to and who it is that's causing the global climate change for their own private profit. Okay? We'll see you on Thursday, okay?